for the introduction. I'm Jess Harwood. I'll give you a little bit of a spiel about She Shapes history if you don't mind. I'm making eye contact with Catherine in the front row here, who is another tour guide for She Shapes history. Founded by Cedar Sargent, an amazing woman who loves telling women's stories. We're in Sydney, Canberra, Melbourne and New York, and soon Brisbane. So we would love to see you on a tour sometime soon. So without much further ado, I would like to introduce the incredible women of the library in their own right, beginning with Melissa Jackson, a specialist librarian in the Indigenous Engagement branch at the State Library of New South Wales. Melissa is Gadigal born and bred, but of Bundjalung descent. She's worked at the library since 1991 and specialises in language inquiries and material, cultural consultation and First Nations family history. So give Melissa a round of applause, if you don't mind. Next we have Dr. Sylvia Martin, former actor and author of 4 biographies of women who have been neglected by Australian cultural history, who today might have identified as lesbian or queer. This includes the book about Ida Leeson, and we'll be talking about Ida tonight. That book got the Margery Medal for Biography and was shortlisted for the New South Wales Premier's Literary Award and the Nita Kibble Award, another woman that we will talk about tonight. Sylvia has just launched a new book, Double Act Irene Mort and Nora Kate Weston, at the National Library in Canberra, and you can buy that book up at and the Ida Leeson book up at the bookshop tonight. So please welcome Sylvia. And last but not least, Maggie Patton, Head of Collection Acquisition and Curation at the State Library, where she manages the library's collection acquisition program and leads a curatorial team. I'm definitely going to stumble over that again. You have 4 decades of experience in the library sector. And when did you start at the library here?
I started here in 1990.
1990, so another long time state librarian at the State Library. You've led numerous initiatives, exhibitions, public programs, and your expertise in the collection is on rare books and historic cartography. So give Maggie a round of applause too. Before we go back in time and talk about the historical women of the library, could you share with us your paths to the State Library and mention maybe one item or aspect of the library or room or exhibition that is your favourite in the State Library? Maggie, would you go first?
Thank you. She had to change that. She wanted me to talk about my favourite item and I refused. Well, strangely enough, my path started, I think, when I was about 8 years old. And in a very pathetic way, I made my own date due slips for my books. And I have a date due slip in my Mary Poppins book, which is very sad to say. I even gave it a cataloguing number. Anyway, leaving that aside, I started as a library assistant in Southern Public Library back in the 80s, which was fantastic because I think working in a public library really gives you a fantastic taste of what a library is about and why they are so important. And you help people with information, you shelve people, you give story time, you read books to children. I wasn't very good at it. You do lots of things in a public library and it shows you that breadth. So I was in a public library for a number of years and then I applied for a job here at the library and I started off as a reference librarian in the reading rooms here. And I might just do a quick detour to say, when you're a librarian, you can become lots of things. It's just like, you can become a gynecologist or you can become a surgeon. As a librarian, you can be a reference librarian, you can be a cataloguer. These days you can be into digital preservation. There are so many different aspects of library work. Anyway, I came in here as a reference library, worked in the reading rooms for a long time, saw that amazing shift from card catalogues, microfiche to online catalogues, CD-ROMs, online databases, that whole stretch of technology. I looked at the first time the internet started here at the library, so a big change. I then moved into digital projects, digitising and providing access to materials online. Then I moved up to special collections and maps and visual materials, and then moved across into sort of the roles I do now with curation and acquisitions. Yeah.
And your favourite? Sorry. And your favourite aspect of the library? Or
well, there are
it's
too many, but I'm going to vote for Stack 3. And on Stack 3, there are fantastic pictures and photography collections, but also rare books and atlases.
Fantastic. Thanks, Maggie.
My path.
Yep.
Okay. Well, my path is, of course, not as a librarian, but as a researcher. And sometimes I feel as I'm a piece of walking history myself, because I realised I came first working in the library here in the late 1970s, so I've been going for more than 45 years, when I was doing my honours degree at University of New South Wales, and then moved on to when I was doing my PhD research, and I was totally buried in the Miles Franklin papers and the Mary Fullerton papers in the library here. And that was when I first heard Ida Leeson's name, actually, because Miles was writing to her friend Mary Fullerton saying, who was a poet, and Miles was saying, I'm going to take your poetry into Miss Leeson to see what she thinks of it. So there you go. And then in 2002, I was lucky enough to be the recipient of the C.H. Curry Fellowship here to research the biography of Ida Leeson, and I spent a year inhabiting the Scholars' Room, which is no longer there where the Scholars' Room used to be, but it was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And most recently, I've been researching here for my new book that's just out, and I've been researching the Arts and Crafts Society of New South Wales papers and some of the papers on Irene Mort in the library here. So sometimes I think it's been my second home, with maybe the National Library as one too.
And your favourite item, Sylvia?
Oh! It's my favourite place, actually, and it's the marble corridor that goes to the right from the Mitchell Library entrance, and it goes past the Mitchell Librarian's room where Ida Leeson used to hold court, and Miles Franklin used to pop in to see her and bring her a bunch of irises for her desk, and it has beautiful beveled glass doors. I think the doors or windows in the door, and beautiful handles. And then you go straight on to what is now the Friends Room, but used to actually be the Mitchell Library Reading Room, which is a beautiful room, and it was still the Mitchell Library Reading Room when I was an honours student, and because the public library was now the Mitchell Library Big Reading Room was the public library. And it was in 1988 that the State Library was opened, and so that was the reading room when I first came here in the late 1970s. So that's my favourite spot.
Lovely.
I would love to say that I woke up one day and I said to myself, I know what I'm going to be. I'm going to be a librarian. But that would be a lie. And I've told this story on a number of occasions. So if you've heard it before, you're going to listen to it again. I became a librarian because I was studying to be a teacher, and I realised that I didn't like children. So I had to, I was in my last semester of uni, and I went to my mother. I said, Mum, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I've done all of this study. And she was in adult Aboriginal education for many years through TAFE. And so she used to bring students from country areas to Sydney to do, block release, to do study in Sydney. And so she'd brought a group of her students to the library, and there was this lovely librarian who showed them around. Her name was Janice. And she said, oh, and by the way, there are cadetships here if any of your students want to apply at the library, work at the library. And so she said to me, well, look, there's a cadetship at the library. And so I said, yeah, Mum, I'll do that. I'll apply for a job at the library. And I didn't. And so she harassed me and harangued me. And finally, to shut her up, I applied for the job and I got it. And it was just like, oh, well, I live at Bankstown, I study at Bankstown, and I work at Bankstown. So it'll be good to commute to the city for a little while. And it'll look good on my resume. And I'll apply for another job somewhere else. And so I walked into this building in the first instance, and then I was brought across to because there's a whole bunch of tunnels through here. So through the rabbit warren to my desk, which is in the galleries room at the moment. And I had a view of the glass, the stained glass window that said Eureka. Now, is that a clue? And then we sort of walked into the Mitchell reading room, and I was just felt so tiny, felt so small. And I thought, wow, I love it already. And so I thought, oh, yeah, I'll stay for 3 months. I do so many different things, so many special, unusual. And so my 3-month gig is yet to be up. I started in 1991. The year after Maggie started here. So, it's just an inspiring place to work, inspiring people to work with, and yeah, this is now. There's a movie called The Mummy, and
I'm so glad you're bringing this up.
So there's a movie called The Mummy, and she's drunk and she says, I know who I am. I'm a librarian. And so here I am. I am a librarian. My family know me as that. And so because I've been here, I started as a library assistant, which means you collect books and you put books on shelves. And it was a great grounding in what we have here and how special it really is. And the need to really look after our collections. And so I am in Indigenous Engagement, I am the collection specialist because I've been here for so long. And so my favourite things in the library, I have a thing for language, for First Nations languages, and rediscovering or reviving language. And so if I was ever to do a PhD, it would be in the use of how we could use manuscripts in language revival, because we have so many amazing language lists here in the collection. Communities do contact us constantly for digital copies of the language lists, which we provide for free, of course. And so I'm also a sticky beak. So, and it's an occupational hazard of being in the library, or being a librarian, is that you do your family history. And so I'm the family historian as well. So the language lists are my favourite, as well as a resource we have here called the Tyndale genealogies. And they came out of a really bad time, the 1930s and 40s, but what they do is they show you like 7 generations of community. And I can trace 7 generations of my family back through these Tyndale genealogies. So the Tyndales and language lists are my favourite things.
That's amazing. Thanks, Melissa. And we're so glad you're still here. Please stay.
Me too.
I forgot to mention, you'll see the photos circling. So some of the women that we're about to talk about, you will spot them in the presentation behind us. But I also forgot to mention, there will be a Q&A session afterwards. That's the QR code over there. We use Slido. So feel free, if you've got a burning question, to pop it in using Slido. You'll need to use your phone. So let's go back in time now. Maggie, could you please tell us who Nita Kibble was and how she came to start working at the library?
So Nita Kibble was the first woman employed in the library. So this was in 1899, and she applied for an attendance job, but she applied with her initials NB Kibble, and of course, they thought she was a man. And so she came in for the exam, and 42 people, isn't it an exam to become an attendant anyway? And she topped the 42, and so they offered her the role, and they really had an internal conversation about whether or not they could employ a woman. So that was pretty amazing. She came in 1899. Now, the job of an attendant was very physical. It was collecting books, putting books away, opening up the library in the morning, closing it at night at 10 o'clock, making sure that there was fresh water for everyone. So it was a very unglamorous physical job. Eventually she becomes a library assistant, I think it was in 1906. Then she does all the professional qualifications and she becomes a senior cataloguer here. So she's worked all the way up all the time. Then in 1919, I think it was, after the war, they started a research service. And it was specifically designed so people could ask questions and find out information on manufacturing, on industry, that sort of thing after the war when everything was starting back up again. And she led that research service and she set that whole service up until I think it was, well, she retired, I think, in the 1940s, something like that. So she worked for a long time here, incredibly well regarded, an incredible researcher. And also when they were designing the Mitchell building here, you'll see the beautiful stained glass windows, the designs on the walls, all of that material. That was all inspired from material in the collections. And so Nita Kibble sort of led the team of librarians looking through the collections for all of these amazing things. She was one of these women, like many of the women who we're going to talk about tonight, who were really struggling in a male-dominated environment, and she had to look after her niece, and so she was essentially a single mother, earning a very small wage, and that was never recognised. And so she brought up her niece as she was working at the library, and then her niece, when Nita Kibble died, then set up a special award, the Nita Kibble Award, which is for life writing. And so it every second year there's a whole award for women who are doing life writing. So lots of things with Nita Kibble.
Incredible. And of course, that's the award, Sylvia, you were
shortlisted
for. Incredible. Why do we go forward in time a little bit now? Forward in time, I guess, to when Ida became the Mitchell librarian.
Yeah.
But maybe you want to tell us a little bit about Ida's background.
I'll tell you a bit about Ida's background because she, unlike some of the other librarians when she became Mitchell librarian, Ida really came from the wrong side of the tracks. She was born in Leichhardt, which was then called Struggle Town. She was born in 1885, yeah. And her father was in trade, he was in the building trade, but with the 1890s depression, things went very bad, and he went to Perth to find work, and he actually never came back. So essentially her mother was left with, I think, 4 children, a job as a seamstress, and Ida went to school at Kegworth Public School in Leichhardt, and then she really, pulled herself up by her own bootstraps. She got a scholarship to Sydney Girls High School to do her high school years, and then she got a bursary to Sydney University, and she was one of the very early women graduates from Sydney University. She graduated in 1905 and with a history honours degree. And then in 1906, she applied for a job at the public library as a junior attendant. This is with an honours degree, as a junior attendant, and did get that job. And so she was there just 9 years after Nita Kibble started there. And they were colleagues for many, many years, of course. And yes, it was a pretty hard work in there. I've got all sorts of stories in the book about about what happened. The public library was a bit of a hangout for a lot of people who didn't have anywhere to go during the day, and so there are all sorts of stories about the men particularly who frequented the library that I won't go into here. But in 1919 she became the she became the cataloguer first. Before that, in 1910, she became the cataloguer of the David Scott Mitchell collection, the Australiana collection. And she'd learnt cataloguing in the public library before that from Christopher Brennan, the poet and scholar Christopher Brennan, and she became a brilliant cataloguer, which may sound different today because in those days it really was a skill of finding out.
There are some
sorry.
skilled cataloguers in
They're
the audience.
extremely skilled cataloguers, but there are more rules for cataloguing than there were in those days. And it was a matter of finding out having the skill, which Hugh Wright, the first Mitchell librarian, said was innate. So there you are, the skill to be a cataloguer was finding out the nugget in a book. And actually, Ida's catalogued books in Dutch and French and Spanish, and so she must have had a good dictionary by her side.
When they first started to employ people, particularly women as librarians, you had to have a degree and you had to have a specialisation in at least 2 languages, one being Latin. Mm. So Melissa and I probably would not be employed today.
No. Cataloguing also really is a skill. I would over-catalogue, will they really know how to find this thing? Am I describing it in the right way? And that type of thing. So cataloguing is very difficult, yeah.
Yeah. I apologise. I know it's difficult, but I'm not a cataloguer. Anyway, Ida became the principal accessions officer back at the public library. She'd been over at the Mitchell Library doing cataloguing in 1919. She became the principal accessions officer and then became the Mitchell librarian in 1932. She was Mitchell librarian from 1932 to 1946. She was the second Mitchell librarian because Hugh Wright was the first, and of course she was the first woman to get the job, and that was with an enormous amount of struggle because William Ifold, the public librarian at the time, had realised that there were more and more young women coming into the library and being employed, and he really wanted to train up some men so that they could succeed Hugh Wright when he retired, because the Mitchell librarian was actually second in charge. And so if the librarian was away, the Mitchell librarian would become the acting librarian. And so William Ifold thought that was completely not going to happen to a woman. And so there were five applicants for the job, 3 women, including Nita Kibble, Zoe Birtles and Ida Leeson, and 2 men. And the 3 women got the first 3 positions, and the 2 men were 4th and 5th. However, it didn't end there because it went through the Board of Trustees and some of them said, no, we can't possibly have a woman. It went up to the Minister of Education, D.H. Drummond, who said, no, you can't possibly have a woman. And so it was debated for quite some time, and eventually some of the Board of Trustees said, no, Ida Leeson really is the most qualified for the position. She has to have it. So there was a compromise. And so the Mitchell librarian position was downgraded to 3rd in charge. The pay was put down, and John Metcalfe, who eventually did become a very good librarian, a state librarian, who came 4th in that ranking, was put up above Ida as the deputy librarian. And so he acted if William Ifold was away. There was a huge controversy about it afterwards, and Jessie Street and a whole lot of the feminists went mad and said, this is only because Ida Leeson is a woman that this has happened, but none of the complaints went anywhere, and that is what happened.
So they basically restructured the library to ensure that a woman wouldn't get the top role.
Yep.
Incredible.
And even though Ifold had tried to train some men to take over the role, the women had actually gone ahead at that stage. Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about Ida is, of course, Ida was quite different in many ways because Ida had a partner called Florence Birch, whom she was with for nearly 50 years. And you might have seen a slide go past of a young woman on one side and a very elegant young woman on the other side. Well, the rather sort of shy-looking young woman who doesn't really want to be in front of the camera is Ida Leeson, and she was in her early 20s then. And on the other side is Florence Birch, who became her partner. And Florence was 11 years older than Ida, and she was an assistant secretary, which was a paid position with the YWCA in Sydney. And so they met. They didn't live together for quite a long time because Ida was still living with her mother. And in fact, Florence went to New Zealand and opened several YWCA branches there and became a very highly qualified worker there. And in later years, when she came back, they lived together for the rest of their lives. Florence was an anthroposophist, and so they lived in Castle Crag for quite a long time and were part of the Castle Crag community with Walter Burley Griffin and Marianne Marnie Griffin, who were also anthroposophists, which was a breakaway branch of Theosophy. And they were together until 1957 when Florence died. So, and the thing is that Ida never pronounced herself a lesbian, but she brought Florence everywhere. Florence came to all the library functions. Florence travelled overseas in England, went to an international library conference in Edinburgh, and along went Florence. And it was mostly just a few of the librarians had brought their wives, but mostly they'd come on their own to that conference in Edinburgh. But nobody, of course, said a word, and Ida just totally accepted that Florence should be there by her side. So without ever declaring her identity, she lived her life as she wanted to lead it. And she was rather an extraordinary looking woman, Ida, as you will have seen from her very
is that the photo you were talking about there with the two women?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, so we've got Ida and Florence. Fantastic.
Florence was a bit of a thespian too, so
You can tell that in her pose there, I think.
Yes, the pose is extraordinary, isn't it? So that was in about 1910 that was taken in Melbourne. It was a great coup to discover that photograph. One of the relatives had it. And I'm just actually going to read you a tiny little bit of my description of Ida herself. Ida cut a most distinctive figure inside and outside the library world. Almost invariably, the first word used to describe her appearance is mannish, and this is confirmed by photographs. A small, slight woman with a prominent and determined jaw, short-cropped hair and steel-rimmed glasses, she walked quickly and spoke in a deep voice. She often had a cigarette between her fingers or in her mouth, which did not seem to affect her ability to conduct a conversation. She always dressed in variations of the same style, to severely tailored suit with skirt in shades of navy brown or khaki, serge or tweed in winter, perhaps linen in summer. Under it she wore a light-coloured blouse tied in a soft bow at the neck or with a knotted tie. Her hat also changed with the season, a plain man's hat, felt in winter and straw in summer. She wore lisle stockings and sensible lace-up shoes. Her style of dress did not change over the years, nor did she alter it for special occasions such as family weddings or important library functions. Her manner was brusque and she could appear intimidating, but her smile, when she did smile, transformed her face. So she was a very, very distinctive figure in the library. A lot of the writers used to come into the library on a regular, and Miles Franklin was one of them. Miles Franklin was there every week, and they used to come not only to do the research for their own writing, but to read the latest in novels, because the library was a deposit library and you couldn't just pop into the nearest bookshop and buy a book. So they did a lot of reading in the library. And Ida became very friendly with a lot of and really helped a lot of the writers and was very keen on the literary world. So she had She had, I suppose some people have called her difficult. She had a difficult manner. She certainly didn't suffer fools gladly. And she always stood up to William Ifold, which some of the other women librarians and library assistants didn't do. In fact, one librarian was heard to say that they shouted at each other. So they apparently quite enjoyed it, and it was a bit of a feud, but it was almost on an equal level. She kind of never kowtowed to the librarian in any way.
Such a fantastic woman. But, sorry, Maggie, did you want to jump in quickly?
I was just going to say the whole thing about women in the library is they loved them early on because they would accept less pay than the men. And they were quite slim. They were able to get between the difficult bookshelves.
Yeah.
They were able to climb on stools and put books away, which the men couldn't. And generally they were quiet and they were neat. And that's right, I had this thing I was going to read out. This is from 1935.
Maggie, I'm sorry to interrupt. That is the photo that you wanted to mention.
Yes. So the woman on the right here. The woman on the right here is called Margaret Barnes. And I'm saying this because this was the image that was advertising the event, and we had her son and her nephew call us urgently to say that was Margaret Barnes, and she was an incredibly important librarian here, and she was in the photo. So if the
shout out to
family
Margaret.
Here, Margaret Barnes. Yeah, so actually in this 1935 thing, it says, a tidy mind, a healthy body, an appreciation of teamwork and a basic love for method and order are the outstanding characteristics of the girl who would become a successful government librarian. So not only would we take a small amount of pay, but we were quiet and timid and organised.
And I do want to come back to pay in a little while because, of course, Maggie was part of a pay equity case, which was a big, very important for the librarians as a profession because it is a very feminised workforce. But first, I might go to you, Melissa. We want to go forward in time to actually when you started, and I know you want to talk about Margie Byrne, another woman of the library.
Okay. So in 1988, Australia was very proud of their bicentennial, and there were so many people who were very proud to find a convict in their family. On the other side, there were a lot of First Nations people who came to the library to do research into who they are and where they came from, and because our collection development policy over time was to hoover up just absolutely everything that related to Australia, New South Wales, Pacific Islands. So we had a lot of cultural material here inadvertently. And so Margie Byrne in 1988 recognised that we had no Aboriginal librarians to administer the First Nations or Aboriginal collections here at the library. And so she sought out money to employ on a permanent full-time basis 3 First Nations employees. So initially it was going to be a librarian and 2 library technicians, but 2 qualified people applied for the librarian's position, so she's gone, all right, we're going to change this, and we're going to have 2 librarians and 1 library technician. And so in December the 9th of December 1991, my best friend Ronald Briggs and myself walked through the doors for the first time. Well, he didn't know that he was going to be my best friend. I just announced it to him, a couple of months later. You're my best friend, aren't you? Poor fella. And so Margie was very instrumental in encouraging me and Ronald to be involved with the changing the way we catalogue material. She helped us with a Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander thesaurus, and so that's a cataloguing thing before. Copy cataloguing and computers and all that type of stuff. I love a good card catalogue myself. And she also encouraged me to join the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Library Information Resource Network, or ATSILEARN for short. And so we were a nationwide organisation of First Nations library workers and allies. And apart from the thesaurus, we established the ATSILEARN protocols. In the first instance, there were 11 protocols that related to access, to employment, to secret sacred, to many aspects of libraries. And then in around 2000, we added to the 11 with the 12th one for digitisation or the digital environment. And and these 12 ATSILEARN protocols are still active or still pertinent to this day. We still use those protocols for our Indigenous Cultural Intellectual Property, or ICIP. We love a good acronym. So ATSILEARN protocols, ICIP. And so the protocols really inform the ICIP, or UNDRIP also, the United Nations Declaration for the Right of Indigenous People also informs our ICIP here at the library. So when the protocols were being written, Margie was very like, yes, you have to be involved with these. She was so adamant that I would be involved with them that she drove me to Canberra one day. So we drove down there, stayed the night, because she loved staying at the university, because it was just down University House, because it was just on the top of the hill, and you could trundle down to AATSIS, where we were workshopping the protocols, and so we spoke all the way down about libraries and then all the way back about libraries and future of libraries. She was always really supportive of me and going further in the library world. So she was my first mentor.
Thanks so much, Melissa. Gosh, there is so much. I have so many follow-up questions, but I've just looked at the time and gone, oh gosh. And we've got questions from the audience as well. But I do feel like we do need to talk about the pay. We need to talk about pay. Let's talk about money.
We need to talk about pay.
Yes.
So in the 1930s, I think it was, women earned about 54% of what a male wage was. In the 1940s, it went up to about 75%, I think. And even when equal pay, it's around 63, when that came through, women still didn't get equal pay, particularly in female-dominated environments. And of course, that was the library. In the 1990s, I think about something like 88% or something of the people who worked here were women. So in the mid-90s, there was a major project to work on pay equity. It was a New South Wales government-inspired project, but we in particular worked on our environment, and there was a whole group of us who worked on cases, explaining what we did, the importance of our role. We submitted lots of documents. I was just a small part of this group. It went on for a number of years, led by the State Librarian at the time, Dagmar Schmidtmeyer. Our first female State Librarian was in 1987, who was Alison Crook, and then Dagmar Schmidtmeyer came after her. Dagmar was very keen on this, and so in 2002 we were successful, and so that was the first time that we actually had pay equity, and that we were the role of a librarian as part of this case was compared to a geoscientist. So we went to university, we had a qualification, we had to do certain roles, responsibilities. Our growth as a profession had developed in the same way, and that's how we proved it. So it was incredibly important. It raised most of our salaries, some just a couple of percent, but some people had an increase of 25% in their salary, and it made the library a place that people wanted to work and to stay. Unfortunately, sometimes. But it was very important, that pay equity case for us. Yeah.
Did you want to mention Jean Arnot?
Oh, yeah, and part of that thing is that it's actually a history throughout this period, from the time of Nita Kibble And then Jean Arnot started here at the library in 1921. And she was also a fantastic cataloguer and a researcher. And she was incredibly strong. In fact, all of the librarians who worked here were incredibly strong around the role of women, the role of the profession. And Jean Arnot particularly, she was part of the PSA, she was a member of the trade unions, she joined the Professional Women's Association, and she was really part of this whole pay equity case even through her lifetime. So it's a very strong feature of the women that have worked here over the last 120 years.
Thank you very much. I felt we really needed to mention.
We need to
mention that.
even though she didn't get on with Ida.
No, she didn't.
She didn't get on
We
with
all
Ida.
don't get on here either.
The feeling was mutual. Quite
Why
a lot
was
of
that,
stories about
Sylvia?
it.
Just briefly, why was that, do you think?
I think part of it was competition. I thought they just really didn't like each other at all.
It's funny because they all had a lot in common, because Jean Arnot was also a woman who was the breadwinner in her family. She wasn't married and she was earning money to keep her family going. They were all women who were strong and they had to keep their families going.
Yeah. Well,
So many incredible women and so many incredible legacies. As we always do in our tours, Women History Walking Tours, we always go over. I'm aware of the time and want to get to just a couple of the questions from the audience. I've got one question. What would have been in Nita Kibble's exam when she sat that exam?
Look, I can't remember, but they are incredibly... We have a copy of the exams they used to sit, and you could not answer it. Seriously, you'd have to be Barry Jones on Picker Box or whatever it is. I'm dating myself there. Like, seriously, they were serious things about Latin, about obscure classical poets, dates around history and war and geography. Incredibly hard. Yeah.
That sounds tricky.
They were very tricky.
When did the shift from a male-dominated workplace to a female-dominated workplace happen?
Well, it happened around... Well, it didn't... Well, it happened probably... I'm not sure when it started, but I know that... I think after the war. I'd say after the war. Do you think?
I think that, strangely enough, librarianship and teaching, in fact, have always been culturally inscribed as feminine workspaces, and yet, until, second half of the 20th century, I suppose, the top jobs always went to men. And so there's a strange contradiction there.
The next question is for you, Melissa, actually. You mentioned before your appointment in 1991 that Indigenous materials were collected without or with very little Indigenous community collaboration. Have you found any stories or collection items that have taken on a new meaning when revisited with Indigenous community input?
How long has she got?
I know. Ask that with 5 minutes to go.
With 4 minutes to go. There's just so many items. There was a Stan Parks, his name was, and he was a manager of an Aboriginal reserve at a place called Brungle, and so he collected little anecdotes, little stories from people, as well as family histories and a map of community. So this is from the 40s or so. And so he just bought, collected all of that material, yarns and those types of things. And so, and then he went to Darwin and became a radiographer or something like that. So he was on the radio, for World War II. And then he went to Newcastle and was interested in German communities and German books. And so then he passed away, and all of his material was gathered up together and put into boxes. And here you go, library, do you want to keep it? Yeah, oh, all right then, we'll keep it. Community came back and they found all of these stories, would be about 3 or 4 months ago. And so they have looked at the collection and they've catalogued it. They've not catalogued it, but they've reorganised the material and told us stories of who this person was, this Freeman, this Mr. Freeman, and so they've given us life to these little anecdotes that Stan Parks had collected 50, 60 years ago. So yes, community does come in and they look at the material and they give us the different. That's why it's called. What we're trying to do is decolonise collections in that way. Is give our stories, give our perspectives on the collection items.
That's great. Thanks, Melissa. And thank you for that question, because I really did want to get to decolonising the library. Such an important topic. We are almost at time, everyone. I'm so sorry. But the incredible conversations, thank you so much. It's obvious that the women that we've talked about, their legacies are still here in the archives, in the State Library, if not in the actual programs that we have today, and the positions we have today. So thank you so much for telling us about all of them. And what we like to say on our She Shapes History tours is, if you've heard a story today that really resonated with you or made you go, oh my God, that really happened, pass it on, tell somebody else, because that's actually how we keep women's history alive. And if we don't do that, then these women get forgotten, as so often has happened in history. So thank you so much. Could you please give our panel a round of applause? And I'm sorry, I forgot to mention the bookshop is open. Sylvia's new book is there, and Sylvia will be around to sign them. And would you like to spruik that, Maggie? I don't. Oh, and that is also a book. I don't know much about that book.
This is the book that's published for our 200th anniversary. So it's got a fantastic essay from our Mitchell librarian now, unfortunately a man, but he's a lovely man. But it also has, as Caroline was talking this morning earlier about the libraries that made me, so there's a whole series of stories about people talking about how fantastic libraries are for them.
Richard's my boss. He is awesome. Don't talk about. Yes.
So another fantastic book. Thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy your evenings.